No questions today, huh?
Oh, yeah. That might take all down. That's why Javi Sami turn Toba Damba Jaola, and it's a Kondo Shebaki, and it's a mutant at the Toba Damba Tela. Jao Puma Tedaki, Jillian Mibun Tedaki, Sikana. That Puma Chingan, and it so dancing, dancing in the Jabo Shipene. That Randa Shen Igala Tedaki Jinejang, Tedaki Sena, and then Datsumba Tedaki Jinejang, Mipunga. And Mibunga Chewaka Tablet Carriers and a Tomba Tenjungu to a Kondo Chine. And it Tendela Guatamna Nandro Drovata. Tendi Ranula Nandro Drova Yemita. Tendi Ranula Kelangova Niki, Aranshen Jitu, Tomba Kelangova. Tendi Ranula Kelena, and it Rashi Jitu, Tomba Kel, what is Tomba Kelangova. Ranshin Jitu, I like Junja Junsajang, Shasa Mebadi, and a Kondo Chine. Jao Puma Tedaki, Jine Mibun Tedaki, so Kondo Chine, and it or Gundo Damba Tandamba E. Mingdam, Datam do, Ranshi Truba Mayimba, Mingi Datam down. Oh, Castle Dadoki Shatam do, Cigar Mingdam, Datam do, Kondo Chiba, Teta Sheva, Chishi, Damso.
So the next verse, or the second half of verse 77, shows that it's an instruction to the king as well to understand the meaning of the profound here, which refers to emptiness, that the king as well should understand that. And then the second half of verse 77 says, "See to it, O king, that no matter what, you are not led to ruination or devastation by those already ruined, devastated." So here, where it says, "O king," that's Master Nagarjuna is calling to the king, and he's in this verse saying to him that one should not, in any way at all whatsoever, be ruined by that which ruins oneself and others. Here, that which ruins oneself and others is essentially the misapprehension of the self. And out of that misapprehension of the self, holding to the self as being real, existing in a way in which it does not actually exist, then one falls into the extreme views and is ruined, as detailed above, so that one should not be ruined by that misapprehension of the self. And then having understood that the emptiness, or that which is empty, has the intention or meaning of dependent origination, having understood that, then one should furthermore understand, has to accept that if one deprecates dependent origination, if one undervalues it, then one falls into a lower state of existence, goes to the evil destinies. And likewise, by the very necessity that one must necessarily accept dependent origination within our own system, one must, by that very reason, accept that things are empty of being established by means of their own intrinsic nature. And likewise, having understood, thoroughly comprehended that when things are empty or devoid of being, or rather, I'm sorry, having thoroughly understood that if things were established by means of their own intrinsic nature, there would be no place at all, or no situation in which one could establish or posit cause and effect in any way whatsoever. Having understood that, then one should understand that the two truths, in the way that they've been explained, the two truths are the two realities, as explained above, such that understand that they are mere names or mere symbols. And then the end of the verse says you should understand it like that. The instruction is given to the king in that way. So where it says mere names and mere symbols, it means that everything is merely established by name and thought. Language and thought is what establishes things.
Oh, yeah. 콘도시바 대다 잠시 스타니와 텔라 세가라 라신지 주와라 군대 중세제 샤산 매바 콘도 치네 아니 대바니 민담 다담도 콘도 치바 텔라 아니 콘도 치바 아니 개회장 텔라 콘도 치바 텔라 개회장 라와 담바 텔라 깝거바다 다면니 셰바 다 담보 깝거바니 자오춘이 미분라 길에 지된 대지수 니라마단 양다바 지시lunge 왕셰 스타 카르송거래 자오춘이 미분라 세라 자보시 변이 아니 최라 지된길 지된len 대위 수루시와 지된 대지 수루스 타니라 미덴비기 세가나 다제게 타니라 미덴바기 양다바 세 토모동바니 사모동바니데 아니 뭐든지 너데라 숨바 치다와 신도 성어든지 너데 임견진도 손라 소와라 숨바 치다와 신도 아니 다 리바당 룽기권에 아니 야오라 샤바 차기 인스잖아요. 샤바를 차오 샤바데 샤거와데 군전 지텐도래 sana 아니 자오치 미봉왕 기회래도 자오치니 미봉왕 기래 지된 대지초 니라 마된 양다다 지신lungi 왕셰세요 도데라 양다바 좀 사모동바니데 외den지 도데라 숨바치다와 시도르바다 롱고관에 자오라 셰기 샤바지 지텐도를 자오치 아니 미봉왕 차비치도데 세네다
So then these two realities, that ultimate and phenomenal reality, that are to be explained as understood and comprehended as mere names and mere symbols, the Master Nagarjuna is instructing the king, impelling him, encouraging him to understand them as they're explained here. And then the next verse it explains further that the king should train himself in this instruction. And that has two parts to it, that the actual situation which is set forth here, and then the explanation of the two forms of selflessness. So first comes in verse 78, presenting the situation here. And it says in the translation here, verse 78, King, O king, so that you might not be, and I would say ruined, I will explain in accord with the scriptures this correct transcendent approach that does not rely on or depend upon the two extremes. So here the commentary explains, starts off by saying, O king is calling to the king, so that you will understand this system or this method which transcends the world, transcendental method, which is that the reality that is not based upon the two extremes. The two extremes here, as mentioned above, are the extreme of annihilationism or a nihilistic view, and then the extreme of eternalism, which entails or induces a realist view that things exist and really exist. So this reality, which does not depend upon those two extremes, one should. I will explain it to you. Here, Arya Nagarjuna is saying, I will explain it to you, just as it is taught in the sutras of the definitive meaning. Sutras that have definitive meaning here refers to the, for example, the Perfection of Wisdom sutras, which exist in a brief, intermediate, and extended forms. And then by means of those scriptures, and in accordance with reasoning and scripture itself, in accordance with those, I will explain it to you. And if you say why, what is the purpose of that? It is so that you, the king, will not be ruined.
Oh yeah, that's Shabbat Chow say. Deni Dida Sonam Chawa de Samudro yu Tendan de Mudi Shenda Rangi Yang Nemi Jibe Mayamba say Gala Dida Sonam Chawa de say Gala Koe Jurjuvi Ani Kasore Dibata Sonam Chawa le Naso Dibati Nasongitang Sonan Chawa de Dendrova O Koyun Jurjuvi Dibata Sonan Chawa Tamlen Devi 아니 텔렌 데비 아니 사무 소라블레 트로비 텐 사무 동반이지 텐 텔렌 데비 사무 소라블레 트로비 텐당 담바 어때 텐당 담바 테니 무대 현당 랑기 대와 네메바 랑기 대와 네메바라 랑기 대와 네메바라 직발렌 직베 마냥와고 사무 동반이지 텐데 무디와 네 무디와 현당 아니 란된 대화양 아니 텐다와 아르 가소래 사무 동반 얘기 텐다 배바기 내매발래 아니 집에 사무 동반 지퇴 마냥 와오 오 마냥 와대 다 전화라 자고 전화라 시작이 텐디 쳇라 샤바 차오 샤바 탐자인 바래.
So here then in the next verse then Master Nagarjuna makes the commitment to explain this subject to the king, and so that he will not be ruined in any way. And then this is explained in verse, or stated in verse 79, which says, beyond both sin and merit, it is the profound meaning derived from the scriptures. Other philosophers, such as the Tirthakas, and even some of our own schools have not experienced it, for they fear the foundationless. It says here, not tasted it, that also is okay. For they fear that which is foundationless. And then the commentary expands on that, saying that non-virtue, call it here sin, or non-negative actions, which function as a cause for samsara. That is, they give rise to rebirth in the lower realms and all forms of unpleasant, undesirable experience. And then virtuous activities as well, meritorious activities. Meritorious activities here refers to the worldly meritorious activities that produce rebirth within the happy realms of existence, the desirable forms of life, as well as the pleasant experiences that one has anywhere within samsaric existence. So this profound topic here, that is emptiness, transcends both of those forms of activity, and this subject of emptiness possesses deliverance, or it entails the meaning of deliverance as it's taught in the scriptures, and it's something which has not been literally tasted, but we could say here experienced by other non-Buddhist philosophers, as well as the Buddhist philosophers, even within the Buddhist tradition, other philosophers who have not understood this subject, because they are terrified of the absence of foundation here, that which is foundationless or without any foundation is describing here emptiness. And so they're terrified of that. And so I will explain the meaning of that to you, Master Nagarjuna says.
Oh yeah, that didn't match any that. Oh, you are Dameni Shabala. Kansa Dame Shabata, Chui Dame Shaba, Tapuma Shabagi, and a dancing Yumi Shabatella, Kansa Dame Shabata, Chui Dame Shaba. Kansa Dame Shabatella and do the Damba, the children social Damba. That Tambo did the Dambani. Kansa ni that can say, Sanam Kansa sing and Georgia Kandaji Shogre, Sana, Mingi Tanyaji Wangi Shabatam Yinji, and the Rangung oil to a Junsa Jawa Maris. 다시 안에 풍보라 때네 안에 민게 타냐지 왕게 샤바자면 인데 랑경 오에 초와 주세자요 말이 대테메비 준전데라 안에 루두기 리바 주주비 안 룬데 마차네 지된 말이 젠젠도 강지 조비 산제송 대이친나 지된데 남도 이些지미대 지된 시와니 뉴지지 지된 대자와대 안에 가르서는 머리비 젠젠시를 가나 머리비 제부 로 땡데야라 주니게 머리비 왕기 아니 가서래 머리발에 때는 중화 인상 지된 머리 젠젠도 간지 조비 산제송 순두와 대화대 만냠도 쉬워져이나 지된 예레지 풍봉아오티 로 예레지 풍봉아오티 니 주지지 전에 예레지 풍봉아오티 니몬자 마르바티 니몬자 마르바데니 하나 주니지 나한테 토메 마르바체 다 토메 마르바데 간데지레서나 오랑경 오에 추바 셴비 왕기스 마르바디 안에 오랑경 오에 추바 셴비 왕기스다 콘도 샤바 나시 라완도 추바 셴비 왕기 아니 레사바라 아니 동아 추바 인장 지된 마르 젠젠투
So here then, this leads into the actual explanation of emptiness here, or the profound, which is the subject that he's explaining to the king. Here, he's what he said previously is that what is it that ruins us, and that could potentially here ruin the king? It is the misapprehension of the self. So in order to prevent that kind of ruin or ruination, then one has to demonstrate that the object of that misapprehension of the self is completely non-existent. That is, the self as it's conceived by the misapprehension of the self is in fact non-existent at all. This then leads into the explanation of the two forms of selflessness. There's the selflessness of the person and the selflessness of phenomena. Selflessness of the person is explained first in a summation, and then the specific wording of it is explained in detail. So first comes the sort of summary explanation of this. And here, the person is that which is merely established by or posited or established through the force of linguistic conventions. Here, it's only through a linguistic convention or words, names, that the person is established, but it is not. It doesn't exist at all in any way such that it would be established by means of its own character, its own intrinsic character. And this is explained in the 60 verses of reasoning as well, another text of Master Nagarjuna, where it says, the world has as its condition ignorance. The Buddhas have taught it in that way. And this verse goes on, but we'll just do the first two lines of it here. First it says, because the fully awakened Buddha has taught that the world has as its condition ignorance, and this is explained in the commentary to this here, is that here the world, one can understand the world in two senses, as we've already said previously. World can refer to the external world, but here it's in reference specifically to the 5 aggregates that are appropriated by mental affliction and contaminated karma. So it's referring to persons that exist within the world, the person. And these aggregates which are appropriated by mental affliction and karma, such a person composed of these 5 aggregates, or designated upon the 5 aggregates, is out of the force of ignorance. Here, this is referring to the form of ignorance, which is the first of the 12 factors of dependent origination, that is, afflicted ignorance, misapprehension of things as being real. And that ignorance causes the person to accumulate karma through the force of misapprehending things as being established by means of their own character. Now, being established by means of own character is equivalent to being established in some autonomous fashion. That is, as we've discussed previously, that things don't exist autonomously, meaning autonomously in the sense of not depending upon other things. So this ignorance then holds to things as if they were established by means of their own character, and through the force of that grasping or misapprehension of things, then the person accumulates karma. Karma is accumulated.
Oh yeah. Then 가서는 말이 바티기 아니 랑공 오여 추바 셴벼 왕기 레사 레라 때네 아니 동아 추바레스 대인자 토메 말이 바티기 아니 치다 따와 따도 마주바 라 치다 따와 따도 마주바 콘도 치바 뭐 또바나 아니 대수미 아니 가서래 강사다 풍분이 어디 캐래 연도 미루라 세가 캐 대수미 캐 밀렌도 미루나 사람 미유 강사 대당 풍분이 어디 캐 밀렌도 미루라 미유 강사다 풍분이 어디 지대 송왔다도 지다 말을 송왔다도 매나야 미유 강사다 풍분이 어디 캐 밀렌도 미루라 요거래 대한 예수 가르래서나 아니 지된 머리 진짜 간에 대치는 지된데 남도 있지 매대 세야지 대한 말을 비기 진단값이 제수 말을 바기 미유 가사다라 아니 나 최니오데 라시지 주와 값이 제수 아니 예수대 간데지 요아래 세나 아니 민게 타냐지 왕게 샤점 민게 타냐지 왕게 샤비 아니 똑다점도 아니 요거래 똑다점도 여봐도 콘도 치고래 됐어
토메 마르바 요라 톡메 마르바
토메 마르바 텐데 안에 전제지 마르바
그냥 가서 강사당 취기 다진기 미큐디 타니도 옆에
미유 텐데 대두가 지다 따와 토메 마르바 지다 따와도 마주바 콘도 치바나 당진지 현유 강사다 최뉴의 라신지 주와 까나양 강사다 최뉴의 메기바 강사다 풍부님이오데 캐밀렌도 미루나 자고래 캐자고래 봐 하고서
이 강사당 풍부 캐밀렌도
미루나 캐량고래
So therefore then the rest of this verse says therefore why isn't it well the first part of the verse it's not this is a verse from the 60 verses on reasoning embedded in the commentary, which says that the perfectly awakened Buddhas have, since the Buddha has taught that that the world has as its condition ignorance, then why isn't it suitable to accept that this world is thought? That's what the verse says. And this latter part of it is then explained. Why isn't it acceptable? Why is it not acceptable to say that this world is thought? That's explained here in the commentary by saying that, so to go back, saying that the world, that is the 5 appropriated aggregates, they create karma, they accumulate karma through the force of, because of the ignorance, which is the first of the 12 factors of dependent origination, that is, through the force of misapprehending things as if they were established by means of their own intrinsic character, some kind of autonomous way of existing. And out of that accumulation of karma, then one suffers. The suffering, the rest of the 12 factors of dependent origination is established. So once one understands, has come to comprehend that the aggregates are not established as they are imagined by that ignorance, that is, this ignorance misapprehends the aggregates as if they were established autonomously or by means of their own intrinsic character, but they are not, they do not exist in that way. Then when one understands that properly, one understands that it's unsuitable to not accept the existence of the person and the aggregates. The person and the aggregates do in fact exist, although they do not exist as they're imagined to exist by that primary ignorance, which starts the 12 factors of dependent origination. And then, since one understands that they don't exist as they are imagined by that ignorance, yet one must hold that the aggregates and the person exist, then one realizes after one has negated the mode of apprehension of the self and the aggregates as they're conceived by the ignorance which misapprehends them, then one comes to comprehend, to understand that they are merely established by the force of linguistic convention. That is, they are merely imagined by thought.
Oh yeah, that is on. Jidan Mari Jinjado Kanji Jovi Sanjason. Teaching and Jidan did number is Jimmy. So Jidan did number is Jimmy. Oh, that Tobe Mingi Tapatam Jawangi Shabaki Yaba. Oh, Rashi Major Den and Memegowa. Mingi Tanya Jawangi Tobe Tapatam Chuba, Konto Chuba. So 데 가서 우만주비 가라 다니 디니 유도 또체나 나줘봐야 다니 고바체 대다 지바 니몬께나 말린 지조라 달래치마 로이 통주지 다니 디 유도 또체나 나줘봐야 다니 줘봐지 시가라 니몬기 견 탐제 자전 싶은 예len 안에 가서 농아와데 가래를 때나 중화래서나 나저 말이 발래 중화체 따티 대중의 대책 담보대다 지바체 나는 네 유도 또체네 나줘봐니 다니 고바체 세가라 강사다 풍보대 아니 직다 되게 미유도 또네 미유도 나는 네 유도 또 미유도 또네 미유도 체네 나줘봐니 다니 고바체 세가 나 가르고 그래서나 아니 라신지 주바도 고교하래서 와 오다 라신지 주바도 고교하래서 어디인자 다 라신지 주와 까비 예수 아니 다 가사당 최 라신지 주와 까비 예수 아니 때는 매번 믿어봐 까비 슈도 가를 유고하래서나 민기 타냐지 왕게 샤삼지 아니 가사다 최대 류와예장
So this exposition here is exactly identical with what one finds in the introduction to the Middle Way. There's a verse which says that a yogi or a yogini who is meditating on this should understand, look at the self, and understand that this misapprehension of the self, which is the primary initial factor in the 12 factors of dependent origination, that is, it's here referring to as it's the wrong view of the disintegrating collection, that is, the aggregates conceived as if they existed as a intrinsically existent self. So when one has that, as long as there is that misconception of the self, then the person engages in various activities, and the entire process of samsara develops from that. And so all of this is of the nature of suffering, because from the initial misconception or ignorance, then all of the rest of the activity and so forth, karma, and the results of it, suffering arises. So the practitioner here, yogi or yogini, is to look at the self and see how it is that the relationship between the self and the aggregates, that is, the misconception of the self here assumes or falsely imagines that there's a intrinsically existing self. Based upon the first, there's a misconception of the aggregates, how they exist. Those phenomena appear as if they're real and grasped at or misconceived as if they're real. And then based from that, then one assumes falsely that there's a real self that exists within that or upon that. And then, so when one does the analysis, investigation of this in meditation, and comes to realize that that self that one perceived or imagined existing with respect to the aggregates is completely non-existent. Through investigation and analysis, one sees that such a self could not possibly exist, is in fact non-existent. So that's the elimination of that concept or the object of that concept of the self. Now, when one does that, and that such a falsely imagined notion of the self is seen to not have any actually existing referent, that is, there's nothing that misconception of the self actually refers to, then one comes to understand that although it is the case that such a intrinsically existing self based upon intrinsically existing aggregates could not possibly exist, nevertheless, it's obvious that the aggregates and the self do exist, and therefore, since through the process of analysis, one eliminates the possibility of an intrinsically existing self dependent upon intrinsically existent aggregates, but the consequence of that is not the negation of the self as such or the negation of the aggregates as such. Rather, it demonstrates or it establishes that the aggregates and the self, which is based on the aggregates, is in fact merely nominally existent. That is, it's only established through the force of linguistic convention, and likewise that it's merely exists merely as it's conceptually fabricated or imagined through thought.
Oh yeah, that and the Shaba Nashi Cheni. Also, Rashi Chua Mejang, Kasada Che, Mingi Tanya Jiwangi, Tapa Zam to Yoba, that Quanto Shaba Nashi Cheni. That ticket turned out the Levin Chumbo, Anya Casa. Papa like Shigavika Socia Gala, Toba Meban Dejala, Sola Uni Yemen, Yanda turned out Toba, Lord and Tempe Sushi Zin, said that Papa like Shigavik Gala, said, oh, Top Castle around Doji, Toba Meba, Dejala Soa, Yoba Mare, Toba Meba Dejala Sola Uni Yeminas. Yanda turned on Tobashi, Lord and Temple Sushi Cheese, Mingi Tanya Wanga Shabata Mato, Yantaba Chuba, Tia Mari, said that was the one of my Yantaba Chuba, Yanda turned on Tobashi, and he loaded Temple Sushi, said that Shijawa Korang to do it. Lord and Temple Sushi.
So then this same point is explained in the Master Aryadeva's 400 verses on the practice of yoga. And that it says there that without thought, there's no way and there's no existence of desire, etc. Without thought, there's no desire, etc. And that being the case, who has a mind would hold to or cling to some kind of really existing thing or thought as such, as who would cling to thought?
Oh yeah, that is Dawajabi Devalikala. Ani Toba Yoba Meba Dejala, Sigala, Candidigo, Sena. Ani Chidanangu Che Tamje, around Dojiki, Toba Yoba, Kone, Ani Yoba de. Or Toba Yoba, Kona Yoba Nidang. Around Dojiki, Toba Meba, Yoba ni Meba Tetanis. Around Dojiki, Toba Meba, Yoba ni Meba Tetanis. 여반이 매바 대다 가르샤서 그냥 양게 가사도 치라 천시샤산 들어와 대다니 다 도저 그 또바 예배 여바 좋다는데 간절해서 간절히 요아래서나 코르 마차바 타발라 루드 따바 나신 타발라 루드 도저 그 또바기 타발라 루드 따바 따르도 아니 요아래 타발라 루드 따바 따르 랑공오에 맞주방에서 서다 파발란 루드 따와 따라 여와래데 랑공오에 주방망에서 저 랑공오데 시에송데 딱딱에 다중야가 시와나시 양다 퇴당 세대 양다데 랑공오에 주바다 전에 와 랑공오에 맞주방에서
So here then, the commentary to this verse from Aryadeva's 400 verses is by Master Chandrakirti, and in the commentary, Master Chandrakirti's commentary says that it's only when thought exists that things exist, and without thought there is no existence. Here we can say that any kind of thing, whether it's an internal thing or an external thing, and that without thought conceiving it, the thing doesn't exist. That is, so a thing only exists, or there is only existence when there is thought, which is conceiving it as such. So it says there that this fact that it's only upon the existence of thought that things exist, and that without thought there is no existence of things. That someone who doesn't understand this, in fact, who doesn't understand it,
유주 간들에 sana 코 마샤바 유주데 가르레 sana 안에 타발라도 답이 주다 안에 타발라도 답아 나시 전에 안에 메게 답아담도 여바래 양 답아 여바 말해
So someone who doesn't understand this correctly, is just like someone who imagines a snake on top of a coiled rope. Someone imagining a snake existing upon a coiled rope is similar to someone who doesn't understand properly the fact that it's only with the thought being present that things actually exist. So this, in the same way, enables one to ascertain that things are not established by means of their own intrinsic nature.
Oh yeah, that is. 가르소레에서는 탄주위 가자 셰주 잠바 안에 타다 배산에 안에 셰고아리 람 가소레 또배 따점 세데 다 근데 공도 셰바 나신 전에 아니 민게 탄예지 왕게 또배 따점도 공도 쳐봐 인장 또배 따점도 공도 취해데 아니 타발라 루도 안에 가서 루도 따바 나신 다시 품비딘도 따단데 타발라 루도 따바 나신 전에 아니 따바 콘도 치고 아래.
So then when one understands the way in which the relationship between thought and things existing, then one comes to understand how they actually exist. And this is illustrated through showing how they exist by means of linguistic conventions, the conventions of language, as well as how they exist or established in the way in which they appear or they are imagined by thought. Through the force of language and thought, then, is how we can establish things existing. This is illustrated, expanded upon in explanation of that passage out of the commentary. Things don't exist by means of their own intrinsic nature. Rather, they arise in dependence upon thought. So here in the commentary, where it says that desire, etc., occur just in the way in which someone imagines a snake upon a rope, that's merely an illustration, because we can show that it's the same thing applies to other phenomena all other phenomena as well. Just in the way a snake is imagined on a rope, then things are established through as existing, posited as existing by means of thought in the same fashion.
또반이 텔라떼디 껴 세나시 전에 다 민바 중세 밥이 뒤체 민바 중세 파바 아니 치루 두단 자신 치루디 안에 탑이 두단 자와 민바 중세 밥이 내가라 아니 타바 통디 잡아라 타발라 두두 추디 아니 된 두지 집어 껴와나 그러와 두지 두두 추디 아니 타발라 두도 냠도 삼주 잠바 타지 띵도 두 중사자 매바 차샤 관계 되네 두 등자 중사자 매나양 아니 타바 중생지 로 제니 아니 루지 집어 껴와나 대나신 제니 아니 차소남 타발라 두도 따와다 숨반이 첨바담래 스탠다 차소 다 치다 나그 쳐 간제지 예나양 아니 맹게 따바자면 맹게 샤바잠도 숨바데 오 타달라 두도 따와다 나시 다 되게 천고아래 타달 두다마
So here then, the example is given, showing here in the commentary above. It said that just as desire, attraction to things, or desire arises out of thoughts, misconceiving the nature of things, positing some kind of intrinsic nature upon them when they don't actually possess it. Similarly, the same thing, this applies to all other things as well, how they arise and are produced from thought, imagining them as existing in a way in which they don't actually exist. So here in the commentary and so forth, in the commentary, it says that desire, etc., other mental afflictions are simply an illustration of the way in which what is being explained here, in the way in which a snake is imagined based upon a rope. So the way the example works here is that if you think you approach a dark room and in the corner there's something coiled up there. And in the corner of the room, it's coiled up, and it looks exactly like, it looks to you exactly like a snake. And then from thinking that's a snake, you're terrified because it looks exactly like a poisonous snake. You've seen them, poisonous snakes, and you have this kind of fear that arises from seeing them. And so in that dark room, when you see the coiled up snake, you apprehend it as if it was when you see the rope, you apprehend it as if it was a real actual snake, and then you're terrified of that. But what's happened there is you simply, based upon the coiled rope, you've imagined that there's a snake there, and you've attributed the identity of being a snake to the rope, when in fact it doesn't possess that identity, or it's not a snake in any way whatsoever. So the illustration here, it says that in the commentary it says if there's a striped rope, which has a color, striped color, just like a snake, and it's coiled up in a way which is just the way a snake is arranged, and this object appears unclearly to you because of the darkness in the room, and you think, with respect to that rope, this is a snake. You have that kind of thought. Then, at that time, you've attributed to it, you've imagined that it's an actual snake.
Oh yeah, that is big. 가서 된다. 주한 하신 전에 아니 가서래 타바 초바당 차세 강장 아니 루지주 가서래 루지 천시 조주 매장 다 대다 강가 초발했다니 키로주단 잡아다 유미사와다 어 텐데 강가 초비 간라 멤버 중사 바바 텐데 간라 아니 타바 존지지 로제니 아니 대내 가서 탑이 아니 초바다 차세 강게되네 루요 말에데 또벤 닌 루로 냠도 아니 또배바 따바잠도 또배잠바 대배라 샤네 디신도 아니 풍보라 때네 아니 가오 냠도 아니 차뒤잠바 아니 풍비 때네 아니 풍보같이 레레와당 아니 뒤지도 초바당 아니 풍비 차샤 강게 되나야 아 시와지 중사자 매자 매나양 저와 조주 중사자 매나야 아 중사자 요마다 매와당 매나야 아니 풍보 초비 딘도 아시 따바잠도 주고 하래
So here then, in the example, you've got all of the various factors present. That is, there's the dark room, there's the coiled rope, there's it has the exact appearance as being like a snake, And when you enter into the room and you have this, you identify it as a snake, and you are terrified from that, seeing it in that way, then you think this is an actual snake. But when you examine it, at that time, when you're thinking it's an actual snake, you have that fear of the snake. Then, with respect to the rope itself, there's no snake there at all. There's nothing to be identified as a snake in any way whatsoever, to any extent at all. The collection, that is the entire situation of the dark room, the coiled rope, the color of the rope, the shape of the rope, and all of that, none of it is a snake. And no portion of it either, that is, none of these factors individually, the dark room, etc., are a snake. So there's no snake there in any way whatsoever. That snake in that situation is merely imagined by thought. There's no snake at all. The snake as such is simply something that is imagined by thought. And just like that, in the same fashion, when one thinks, I am, we think I am, and this arises in dependence upon the aggregates. That is, it's in dependence upon the aggregates that we have the thought, I am. When that arises, there's nothing at all within the aggregates themselves. That is, there's no it's not the composite of the past and the future continuity of the aggregates. There's not some situation or composite of the aggregates at a single time. There's no portion of the aggregates themselves which is suitable to be identified as the I. There's nothing within the aggregates themselves which are suitable to be identified as the I. Rather, we simply posit, or we sort of imagine the I upon the aggregates in the same way in which we imagine a snake upon the coiled rope.
그래서
독비다섬.
오야 좀 안돼. 오 가서 그래. 풍비 초바당 차세 강양 아니 어디 천시 조좀 매봐. 봐. 전시 조치 준세. 아니 군전 대치리 랑아 아니 풍보당 차당 차전량 오 타대바 티시 진주 매봐. 풍보 들어봐. 차전당 차당 차전량 오 타대바기 티시지 아니 가 진주 매배 진주양 준세 매배 다 오는 가데 가르에서나 풍보랑 오 타대바야 매 아니 풍비 차세래양 아야매 초반에양 아매 다 오는 가데 간르지라도 선ang 가데 아니 다시 풍보 초비 띵도 아니 또 민기파 또배 풍보를 때는 샤바잠도 샤고를 마도 다시용원에 준세자 매봐 어땠을 거래.
So here then, if we look for the I, when we think I am, and we're searching for that within the aggregates, we see that it's not findable. It doesn't exist within the aggregates, either some kind of continuity of the aggregates through time, past and future, present and future. It doesn't. It's not some composite of the aggregates at a single point in time. It's not some portion of the aggregates which is that which is identified as the I. There's nothing that we can establish or posit in any way whatsoever as that which is identified as the I when it's searched for in that fashion, and therefore, since it's the case that likewise that oneself, that is the I, is not of a nature which is separate from either the parts of the aggregates or the composite of the aggregates. It's la kon again the rang pumpu chatan chachin le mo hadepe 대치 랑 풍부 차다
랑스나 랑 풍부 차당 차전에 뭐 타대배 아니 가서 타대바 되기 아디 실수했어요 말이 실 아니 디 실진주 중사자 매배 진주 중사자 매바이자 당 아디 간데 사고를 해서 아디 아니 다시 풍부 쳐받으라 때네 아니 또배파 샤바 잠도 이지 라는 걸 줘요 말이
뭘 줘요
라고 뭐서
어디 하고 뭐 랑 풍부 차
랑생 알아서 되지 랑 소소랑 풍비 차당 차전에 뭐 타대바 디 실진주 매배스요 아디 실진주 매배 그러와 실진주 중사자 매배 다랑 아디 가와지를 요아래서나 또배 풍부를 때네 샤바담도 안에 샤고르만도 풍부랑 경원에 샤야지 요 말이
풍부랑 경원 I'm sorry. 풍부 아까
풍부랑 뭐 타대배매 그러와
타대배매
인상 차당 차전량 뭐 타대배 디실 타대배 이 디시 진주 중세 매배서 당아도 요주 간대지와래서나 아니 또배大把 풍부를 때는大把 잠시만도 샤서요 말이스 풍부는 뭐 타대배 알 진주 매배 전득으로네요
So then therefore because the eye is not such that it has a character which is different from that of the aggregates in its parts. It's neither identical with the aggregates in the sense of being findable within the aggregates as such. That is, when you look for the eye, the sense of self, within the aggregates, as in the continuity of the aggregates, the past, the future of the aggregates, and so forth, one doesn't find something there which is the I as such. And since this I also, or the self, is not such that it is of a character which is absolutely distinct from or of a different nature from the parts and the composite of the aggregates, then there's nothing which, when one looks within the aggregates themselves, there's nothing within them as the aggregates as the base of the I, which is to be apprehended. Therefore, this I is not established at all by means of its own intrinsic character. It's simply something which we attribute to the aggregates. It's posited based upon the aggregates and is designated upon the aggregates by language and thought, but it's not established and does not exist by means of its own intrinsic character.
Oh yeah, that indeed. 타자 주든 안에 잠바 안에 타자당 타지준도 주다디 가나 안에 타지 차샤 강양 주도 맞추바당 와 주도 타지 차샤 강양 주도 만주장 안에 타발라 때나 타자 준진게 로제 와 대신도 안에 풍보라 때네 풍비 차샤 강양 안 맞주장 다시 풍보라 때네 풍부를 때는 때에 가다라 아니 완전히 지켜봐 지바체 그러와 다더니 타달라 주도 따와 티체나 아니 타저 따바 잠도 타저딘도 주 맞음 타저딘 따바 잠도 타저 주 맞음 다시 풍부를 때는 아시 따바 티체나 아니 따바 잠도 맞추바 말이 그러와 맞추바 다바잠도 나추 타라라 두도 다바잠 따도 잠바 따다 직직바래데 타바 두도 다바잠도 아니 두 추구를 해서는 두 맞추바.
So here now we have to be careful and make the distinction between the way in which one is designating or imagining a snake with respect to a coiled rope versus the way in which one imagines or designates the person or the I with respect to the aggregates. The process by which this mental fabrication or imagination of the I with respect to the aggregates is exactly comparable to the way in which one mentally fabricates or imagines a snake with respect to a coiled rope. However, it's essential to distinguish the two in that when one imagines a snake on a coiled rope, that snake does not exist in any way whatsoever. That is, it's purely fictitious and is purely attributed to the coiled rope, but there's no snake there whatsoever. There's this fundamental difference in the designation of the I based upon the aggregates, because in that case, the I actually does exist. And when one designates, we have to say that the I, when we designate the I, or imagine, we can say, mentally fabricate the notion or concept of I as a designation for, designated upon the aggregates, then that I does exist. It's an existent thing. So, although they're both the same in that they are imagined by thought, and in the second case, the I, which exists, is imagined by thought and is simply designated through the force of language and thought, but it is an existing thing, and so the distinction there has to be maintained.
근데 개발 관리 주어래서나 아니 다시 품볼라 때네 다시 품볼을 그냥에 나다 요아 말해대 아니 다시 품볼라 때는 아시 따바티잖아 아니 다시 품비 띵동 아시 따바점도 주바 따바점도 주 대주에대 거래래서나 따바점도 아니 아시와 지대지 타냐라 차바 따바점도 나데라 타냐비 시에 내봐 매봐 아니 된단잡이 참여야 내봐 매봐 내봐 매봐 인상 따바점도 나시 래 아니 가서래 래 셔봐보다 자동나 써와 그 라운 쪄봐봐게 나 참여바티 샤투고 아래 그 긴장고 뒤지래서 따바점도 다시 참아인바스 다시 참아인바세래 될라 따바점도 지대지 타냐라 다시 품비든도 따바다도 아시 지대지 타냐라 차바다도 다시 품비든도 따바다도 아여바달라 타냐베 참여 그 내봐 매봐 아니 된단자위 참여 내봐 매봐 인상 아니 품부 강사세가 다시 품비든도 따바점도 주바래 그러와
So how is it that we make this differentiation between the imagined snake, which is completely fabricated, completely fictitious, and the imagined self or I, which is in fact exists? Here, both are fabricated by thought, and they're simply designated to something that they are not. That is, the aggregates as such are not the I, but the I is designated based upon the aggregates, and the I is mentally constructed or mentally fabricated based upon the aggregates. Now, in the case of the I that exists, here the mere I, which does exist, here, it's not, we don't find it within the aggregates. That is, when we look at the individual aggregates. None of the 5 aggregates individually is the I. Similarly, the composite of the aggregates is not the I. The continuity of it, past and future, or some momentary instantiation of it is not the I. However, this I, which we designate and we mentally create and designate based upon the aggregates, we do so through through the force of linguistic and conceptual conventions. This, nevertheless, is validly establishable. How do we know that it is validly establishable? Because it meets 3 standards by which we are able to establish anything that exists. That is, it's commonly known within the world that there is an I. The I is that which is the agent that performs actions. It creates karma and experiences the results of those activities in the future and so forth. It does things. So that's the first standard, that it's commonly accepted within the world that that the I exists. Then second, the existence of the I is not contradicted by any kind of valid cognition. That is, any kind of conventional valid cognition where one is investigating the nature of conventional things through reasoning. There's nothing within that process of investigation that negates the valid establishment of the I. Then finally, the third criterion here is that the existence of the I is not negated. The existence of the conventionally existent I, that is the I that we're speaking of here, is not contradicted in any way by reasoning and valid knowledge, which is investigating the ultimate nature of things.
Oh yeah, that big so tabala do the tadi jamba, ani tadi dindu do ani tabatum the truku revasana, ani truku mares. Tadi dindu do chidanji tanyala majaba. Tadi dindu do yobala, tanya bishawa never yoba. Tandaja chama never yoba. Dunzenji, Taja Drudana, you want she de charge Suji Lebi Shewa in be. Charge Tuju Lebi Shewa in be. Gunjajik de embody. Taba Dunzenji, not one she de charge Suji Leba, then a Taba Drudana in che. Ani, what Taji thing to Tabatam to do, Yabala, did them be Tanyala Madraba. Tella, Ani Tanya with Temen never yoba. Tandanja with Temen never yenza. Tabala do the Tabatam yin yang, Tabatam do, and drew matu.
So if we return to the snake, which we imagine existing on the rope, there, in that case, we can demonstrate that such a snake is non-existent. First, we on further examination, we can come to realize that the snake is not there. That is, we can come to see that the appearance of the snake to us is simply a result of our vision being affected by a temporary conditions which have caused us to misapprehend the thing as an actual snake. So that's one basic point. And then furthermore, in terms of the 3 standards or 3 criteria by which we establish something as being conventionally existing, the existence, a snake being a rope, I'm sorry, let's stop that. A rope being a snake is not commonly accepted within the world. In ordinary worldly conventional terms, it's generally acknowledged that snakes are not ropes, so, that ropes are not snakes. Ropes are not snakes. That is, that's just within common worldly knowledge. That case, the rope being a snake is not the case. And then likewise, when one engages in investigation of a thing through conventional valid cognition, conventional valid knowledge, analytical investigation of the thing, then it's of course the case that ropes are not snakes. And then likewise, when one looks at it from the point of view of the valid cognition which understands the ultimate nature of things, then it's the rope is not a snake either.
Oh yeah, that 되게 가사당 최지다면이고 또 뒤위最近땜바데 마치네. 다 지금 소설 땜바데라. 아니다. 주 삼일 주마이 매매루면 남생마이 그면나 텔레션에 주강 세대다. 가소래 중국아래 와 감주도 미루마당 세대 다 감주도 미루마 가래래 사나 다 주세 가난다 배 다set대라 감주가 나네 주세에 사마이 추마이 봐 그와 어다지 감주 어디 아니 간저 감주 뒤와라 때네 따바래 레마도 감주 레레와당 뒤와당 아니 뒤와당 양들에 감주 뒤와 telaya 오타대와 강양 아니 주메롱래 주부사래 와 오늘 주 예수 간저지 와래 에서나 다드마저와 다단다 감주 뒤와라 때네 따바잡지 요고래 스탄이야 주질도나 보냐.
So then this leads into the explanation of the individual words of the verse that was given above, the previous verse in the text. So this is verse 80 here. The person is not earth, nor water, nor the person is not earth, nor water, fire, wind, or space, nor is it consciousness. And if it is not all of these together, what other thing could the person be? So here the word that's being translated as person also actually can be translated as just human, a human being, but it also can refer to persons in general. And the commentary here is explaining this in two sort of portions. That is, first showing that the six constituents that are the basis for the identification or designation of a person are not suitable as the person as such. And then by means of fivefold analysis, we negate the idea that the person is established by means of intrinsic nature. So the first of these is looking at how it is that the six constituents here refer to earth, water, fire, wind. I'm missing one. Earth, water, fire, wind, space, and consciousness. Those six constituents or elements, one could say, are not suitable to function as the person. And then so we went through the verse as such, and it says here that the human being or person, these words are effectively synonymous in this portion of the text, is merely designated in dependence upon the collection or composite of the six constituents here. But it's not any one of the six constituents individually, and it's also not the composite of the six constituents, and it also doesn't have any kind of character which is fundamentally different or intrinsically other than the six constituents here. It's inappropriate to posit a person in either of those alternatives there.
남세 마이 꾸미나 텔레션비 교우康 세가 대야 남세 마이 세대 감주보레레레 마이 배체 꾸미나 세대 감주 뉴바양 안에 강사마 교우 마이 바 텔레션 교우 시 강사 풍부 대달래 뭐 타대비야 기와 가사 미루마데 땡한바.
So here it says, the last two lines say, it's the person is not, well, the first two lines again, the person or the human being here is not earth, water, fire, wind, or space. And then the last two lines says it's not consciousness, and it's not all of them. And there's no person or human other than those as well. So what that's saying is that the last two lines in particular is that it's not the person or human is not identical with the individual constituents, the parts or the constituents that make up the collection that it's designated based upon. Rather, it's and it's not the collection of them either. That is, it's designated or attributed to. It's designated based upon the composite of them, the collection of the six. But it is not the collection of the six itself. So the last where it says it's not all of them, that means that the collection of the six constituents is not the person, and there's no person that exists other than, like, apart from the collection of the six constituents. So it's inappropriate to say that there's a person that has a character which is fundamentally distinct from or separate from those six.
저 감주 뒤 치리 양다 많이 치다와 대신 감리를 양 뉘지 양다 니도 미 세가나 아니 가서 저 감주 뒤 저 아니 감주 뒤와라 때네 따와 인장 안다 양다 봐 말에 양다 봐 대바 추와 말에 감주 뒤와라 때네 따와 인장 양다 봐 말에 강 요데 아니 감주 뒤와라 때네 양다 봐 마인바 치다와 대신도 아니 감레레 상감 중감 맹간라서 왜 감레레장 아니 양다바 추바 말이 마인바 가레레에서 대다장 상감 대양이랑 상감 그 차시아 두만 뉴알라 때네 따와 인장 감레레와 양다바 추바 말이 대신 감리레레장 안 되지 양다 뉴드민.
So in the next verse says that the person is, because it's the composite of the six constituents. Here, what this you have to read this as in saying that because it's designated in dependence upon the composite of the six, the collection of the six constituents, the collection of the six constituents, earth, water, fire, wind, space, consciousness, are the basis for designating the person. But because the person is designated upon that collection of the six constituents, then it's not real. That is, it doesn't exist as it appears by means of its own intrinsic character. And just like that, just as is the case with the person, similarly, each of the individual constituents, because each of the individual constituents is a composite or collection of things, therefore it also is not real. It doesn't. The individual constituents are not real either. So what this in the commentary to this verse says that the person here is not real, not established as being real, because it is designated based upon the composite or collection of the six constituents. And just like the person, each of the individual constituents is not established in reality or as being real, because the individual constituents as well are themselves designated in dependence upon collections of many parts. Here, these six constituents, earth, water, fire, etc., are themselves categories comprising or things which themselves are collections or composites of multiple other elements or factors.
Oh yeah. That 가서래. 요 감도 되어라 따와 인자 양다바 추와 말에 스라wan도 추와 말에 다죠 타냐도 민게 따바잠도 여봐. 다시 띵도 민게 따바잠도 여봐. 다시 띵도 여라요. 다시 띵도 매. 다시 띵도 아니 민게 따바잠도 여. 다시 띵도 여나 다시 띵도 짜나 녀고 거래. 니나 아라시 추가 주고 거래. 대인자 다시 띵도 민게 따바잠도 여봐.
So there, here then, the person, we designate the person upon, based upon the collection of the 6 constituents here. Now, but however, the person as such does not exist within the collection of the 6 constituents. It's simply designated through the force of linguistic conventions, through conceptual construction upon the collection of the its base here, which is the collection of the 6 constituents. That is, and therefore, because if the person existed by means of its own intrinsic nature, if it existed autonomously, then it would have to be findable in some way within the collection of the 6 constituents. And when one examines them individually and collectively, looking for that person, then no such person is found, and that absence of the person existing in some autonomous fashion or existing by means of its own intrinsic nature establishes in turn that it is merely designated based upon its basis of designation here, and therefore is only established through the force of linguistic convention and thought. Similarly, the same thing applies to the basis of designation. The basis of designation in this case is the 6 constituents, and if we examine them individually, we find that they in turn are merely established through the force of thought and linguistic convention, rather than being established or existing in some autonomous fashion by means of their own intrinsic nature.
어디는 가서다 대디제라 제방아이 관에 가사랑 신지 주와 가바니 다 제방아이 관에다 남중이 일반나네 제방아워디 이제 제방아이 관에 가사랑 신지 주와 가바니 풍보 담미 대대미 대라 대미 대매미 풍다 매신 다제민 매다 신다 나는 대제단에 기다려 세다 되임바래 그러와 다 담보데 풍보 담에 대대매 세가라 想다시 풍비 짜는 풍비 띵도 안에 가사 짜와네 아니 풍보데 직당 타대당 땡당바당 아니 땡바라 소와다 준저 매와지 송과로 나가 매데 풍보다 가사기 풍보다 가사 다 직인데 가사기 다 풍보다 가사기 다 직인데 나 미다바타와다 도마타와다 나 미다바타와다 도마타와다 깨와 미렘바 소지냐와 주로 봐 깨와 미렘바 소지냐와 주로 세려가 다 디스송거를 말해라 다다 풍보니오데 아니 가서를 라신지 주위 찍이나 안에 다다 풍보니오데 찍이봐 찍도 좋아 라신지 주위 줄라 타다다면 그 찍이는 거 봐. 나다 풍보대 라신지 주위 찍이나 풍보 제지 세바진도 안에 다 제지 쳐고와 연당 안에 다 미다봤다. 나한테 좀 체디 풍 수봉 체디나 가되단바 안에 다 태양 가데 안에 저와치만 면조 왔다. 다 미다봤다와. 풍보 도마 여바 신도 다다 풍보니 어디 안에 가서래 타다 때문에 그 찍이나 풍보라 도마 여바 티슈 다 도마 타와. 그러와 아니 저와 참바 미담바 세라다 같이 다 니오데 아란자지 주비 저와 이나 아니 란자지 주비 타대와 이나 아니 규타다 그 저와 규현지 저와 세진기 제와 최진기 미련 바시 나신체니 란잔지 유타대 비제와 타대서 가서 란잔 타대 기제와 이나 란잔지도 왜 타대 기제와 이나 아니 ngaji 다니 어디 어제와 미련 바타 왜게 유타대 세진기 제와 최진기 미련 바 나신체니 안테마 미련 비초지 냐마 독장 거야 그래서 때때 고도 고주고치다
So here then, the next verse shows how we can negate the idea that the person is established by means of its own intrinsic identity through a fivefold sort of analysis. There are other ways of doing this analysis in 7 parts and so forth, but here it's presented in 5 ways. So here it says in verse 82 that the aggregates are not the self, nor do they exist in the self, nor is the self in the aggregates, but without them the self cannot exist. And the self and the aggregates are not intermingled as with fire and fuel. Therefore, how could the self exist? So here, self is referring to if the self was existed by means of its own intrinsic nature or existed autonomously, then it would have to exist in one of the ways in which it's being investigated. So what's going on here in general is that the I or the person, the self, has to exist in some relationship with the aggregates, the 5 components that collectively make up the basis for the identification of a person or an I or a self. So when one looks for the self with respect to the aggregates, when one investigates it and seeks it with respect to the aggregates, there's 5 ways in which the self could exist in relationship to the aggregates. So if we take the first of these, if we say that the aggregates and the person or the self are identical, then multiple unacceptable consequences would entail. That is, for example, the self would become impermanent. That is, the self, we see with the aggregates that they arise and disintegrate and such. They come into existence and they disappear over time. And if that were the case, then the self also would disintegrate and disappear altogether. For example here, if at the end of the current life, when we die, the aggregates will disintegrate, and if the self was identical with the aggregates, then we ourselves would disintegrate as well and become non-existent. That would be one fault. Or on the contrary, if the self was identical with the aggregates, or in addition, if the self was identical with the aggregates, it would be the case that we would have multiple selves or multiple eyes, and because the aggregates themselves are multiple, there's 5 of them. And if that which is multiple is of the exact same character with something else, then that other thing has to be multiple, plural as well. And just as there are 5 aggregates, you would have 5 selves, and that's, of course, absurd. And then similarly, if the self was identical with the aggregates, we would have the unacceptable consequence that we wouldn't be able to remember anything. That is, if like the recollection of previous lives, or the recollection even of events earlier in our lives would be impossible, because if the self was identical with the aggregates, just the self change, the aggregates change over time in that way. And thus, because the self would, in its current state, would exist by means of its own intrinsic identity as distinct from some previous instantiation of it or previous form of it, there'd be no way that we could remember things that we did earlier in our life, or the same kind of another problem that would arise from this is that if the self was established by means of its own intrinsic identity, then the events that occur la gendi kiwa drumpa mi tepa kiwa rangetsiniki kiwa drumpa mi tepa la kiwa drumpa mi tepa kiwa drumpa mi tepa
kiwa drumpa ngawa kwada kandejo
kiwa drumpa mi tepa
kiwa drumpa ngawa sana
chuchindang nyepe lechindang chuchin kiwa drumpa mi tepa yorpa 이승랑 총아.
그래서 가와려서 된다. 내 도스 자와 임바다. 풍부 다음에 대대 미시 가라. 아니 대라 대매 미시 당보 대기 자와나想자나 풍부 띵도 다. 다이 가라. 아니 다다 풍부 다 풍부라 남방아 요와 말이. 와 남방아 근데 요와 말 남방아 요와 말이. 다 대라 직당 타대 땡땡바. 다 되니想天的先看到这边把这个引进来，那第哪呢？谈不得了，碰不到看啥个大经营呢？我经营呢，大部分我经营呢，然后就只有我经营呢，然后就只有我经营呢，俺那经的做过来，大经营过来，我他在对面个经营过来是大经营的，他在对面个经营呢，俺那大没大把他哇，现在肯定是个嘞，是那。풍부经济确保性都大经济去过来，彻底是不搞着的干吧？俺呢，看啥的呀？搞的，俺呢看啥的？基本叫我起码民主哇，那些钱呢，大的叫我起码民主哇，俺呢大看说的，大没大把他哇，풍부经济，他妈他哇，现在看着嘞，是那풍부人啊，要把提醒都大样，他妈他的。大部分有点个，他在对面个经营呐，俺那碰不了经，大铺经里面把经都碰不了呀，俺那经里面把通经的差不当，碰不他妈也行，大他妈他娃钱，是吧？但今天给我钱吧，没得吧？在这个大当碰不你我的，他在让咱去注意，他在一呢，俺那真没天线，最近的最近那些真没天线用过的。最近个叫吧，最近个没点吧，哪些钱你干了？俺那他我去打你我这个叫我钱吧，没点吧，给人我的住的，但讲给车外的可以吧？在哪里
？Kiwa drumpa mi tepa.
Kiwa drumpa mi tepa.
So here then, to repeat that if we examine the relationship between the self and the aggregates, or the person and the aggregates, one can say equally. There's five sort of potential options here that the aggregates and the person are identical. If that was the case, then the person or the self would become impermanent, and would so the aggregates we can observe have the characteristics of arising, enduring, and disintegrating. They arise and disintegrate constantly, and then at the end of this current life that we're in, there will be the final disintegration of this portion of the aggregates. There'll be a complete disintegration of it. And if the self was identical with the aggregates, then it would entail that the self would disintegrate, would cease to exist upon the disintegration of the aggregates. So that's one unacceptable consequence that would entail for the positing the identity of self and aggregates. Then likewise the impermanence that the self would become plural, just as the aggregates are five. If the self was identical with the aggregates, such that it has exactly the same character as the aggregates, then it would entail that the self would be fivefold. There would be five of them, and that's also unacceptable. Then likewise, there's the problem that it would be inappropriate to recall births through if the self was identical with the aggregates, because the self. I didn't get this. I'm sorry. Apologize. kiwa drumpa mitepa.
저 처마 믿음 봐.
풍보당 강사 풍보당 딱 치기나 kiwa
저 처마 믿음 봐세 가나 당아지 니오데 타데나 란자 유튜브에 타데이나
앙직 주비
데메 텐션 연구래 당아지 니오데
알레
라
디 랑기칭 유튜브 랑기칭
란자 유튜브에
타데
타데이나 아니 데메 텐션 그 타데 주고래 라 세진의 추진나신 세진의 자와 추진의 미래바 나신 나지 다니오테 란자 유튜브에 아니 주와 인타데이나 아니 데메 텐션지 연구래 대이나 저왕 아마기 다데 저와 치마기 아니 텐투고 말해서 아 뒤에 자왕 알라 뉴스 제서 냐바게 아니 텐투고 말해서
So then if on the other hand the self was completely distinct from the aggregates, that is, if the self was such, or person was such that it was, by its very character or in its own intrinsic nature, was distinct from the aggregates, then that would entail the problem, one problem particularly, that one would not be able to recall one's previous lives in any way whatsoever. The reason for that is that the self and the aggregates would be like two distinct persons. Like the examples given are like Yajnadatta and Devadatta. These are two conventional names for two different people. If the self and the aggregates were of such a intrinsically distinct character that they would become unrelated in the same way that unrelated people don't have memories of each other's events in each other's prior lives. And if that was the case, then there would be no way for example, the Lord Buddha to have said at that time, referring to one of his previous lifetimes, he said, "At that time I was King Mandatar." That was the name that he had at during that previous life. If the I or the self or the person were intrinsically distinct from the aggregates upon which the I or self or person is designated, then it would be impossible for the Lord Buddha to have made a statement like that.
Oh yeah, that digging. 풍보 담면 대대 매 세대체 다 뒤에라 대라 대매 미 세대 대라 대매 대대 미 세가 다 된다 대비 쇼니오 가고요서 된 대라 대매 세대라 나텔 풍보대 아니 가숑라 자쇼 땜바다 요 말에 땜바 말에 자쇼 땜바 나름 땜바다 마이라 대라 대매 테메 가서 텔라 테메 민 되게 아니 풍보 텔라야 다데 야 가숑라 제슈다 바다 땜바 말에 바 가르르서나 때나 미룽와래 마미 비셔 들어봐 다 란자 유튜브 아니 가서라 땜발라 테메 텐션이 바 집어 주고 하래 들어봐 란자 유튜브에 타대발을 데메 텐션 연구와 나신전에 란자 유튜브에 땡땡발라야 아니 데메 텐션 연구와.
So here then other alternatives for the relationship between the self and the aggregates in terms of like their relationship if the self and the aggregates had a relationship such that intrinsically by means of some intrinsic character they were related to each other in a relationship of dependence, then various forms of unacceptable consequences would occur. And here the example is given where it's stated that this self is not dependent upon the aggregates intrinsically in the way in which a juniper bush is dependent upon like a brass basin.
Oh yeah.
La karshon yashuktar.
Karshon la yashuktar batarase.
Oh. So it's like a flower, we could say a flower pot and a flower. Another way to say it, like if you have a potted bush, a small bush that's in a brass pot. The aggregate, the self is not like the bush, which has the dependent relationship of existing within the brass basin or brass pot. So that kind of dependent relationship is not the case. And likewise, it's the case that the aggregates do not have a dependent relationship with respect to the self in the same fashion. Because if that was in fact the case, we would observe them as existing in that way, and they are not observed, the self and the aggregates are not observed to exist in that way.
Oh, yeah. The castle, that Dambaya, Mayindi, Miru Mayim Chers. That Ransi Tree, then Dambayana Yana. 가션다 자신이 원데 뒤다도 안에 가션당 자신이 원데 가션 여 친절라 자슈여가 자슈여나 여 친절라 가션여가 뒤다도 용거래 야나 데메 텐션 용거래 와 자신이 원데 타대나 데메 티자고 된적이다 견주고 여인다 미루 마음이 비치로
So here then, I mean, what's being said is that we're talking about a dependent relationship which is established by some kind of intrinsic nature. That is, that this relationship of dependency exists intrinsically. So in the case of the flower pot and the flower that's in it, or to use the example given in the text, the little small tree, juniper tree, and the brass basin that it's situated in, they do have a relationship of dependence. That is, the little bush depends upon the flower pot, but the basin. But that relationship of dependency is not established intrinsically, because if it was intrinsic, that dependent relationship was intrinsic, then it would have to exist at all times. There could never be an instance in which the pot could exist without the bush, and vice versa. The bush could never exist without the pot existing, because their dependent relationship would be established intrinsically, autonomously, and would not be subject to conditions.
어디다 풍부대 매바 안에 풍부 매바야 다 코란 찍고 양가와 매바야 말해. 그렇죠? 양가와 매바야 마인데 풍부 매비 천이전도 매바 타위지 풍부 맨나야 다 매고래. 그렇죠? 가대 풍부 나라서 풍비 천이 매바 줄을 싸와셔서 소환나 시천이. 그렇죠? 풍부대 매바 다 양가와 매바야 마인데 풍부 매비 천이전도 전도 매바 타위지. 풍부 매바야 안에 다 로유도 소마 타위. 안에
So here then, these kinds of, this sort of relationship of dependence in which that relationship exists in some kind of intrinsic fashion would have to be observable. We'd have to see that, and we never do see that. It's not seen. Similarly, without the aggregates, or rather to restate that, we also do not observe the self alone without the aggregates. That's not observed because that would entail that one would observe it in a way. We would observe the self in the I or the person in a way in which it did not it would not be identified in relationship to the aggregates. it would not possess an identity in relationship to the aggregate. So we never see or we never observe the I or the self in any way in which it's sort of isolated in its own right, it's completely separate in some sort of separate way, apart from some form, configuration of the aggregates. So therefore, the I or the self person exists such that its identity is related, is dependent upon the aggregates. It doesn't exist apart from them.
Oh yeah, that is Punda machine that me Tejidani Chitario said that Dada Pumbo knew de Meda Shin Nashin Jade. Any Tinidang Sigan Jitan Tinidang Shan Jedu Tinidang Shan need to Jedu Meba in Jitan Tada Kanduya Jedu Meba Tinidang Shan Kanduya Jedu Meba Mendes. Punda Meda Punda machine that mean said Ngola Jedu Meba Mende. Ngola Tinidang Shan Karung Chavish, Ngochi Yin Chenjala, and a Jida Tada Karung Chowkis, Tinidang Shan Karung Chavishero.
So then the last or the third line of this verse says that the self, the aggregates and the self are not mixed like fire and the firewood. So what this is referring to is someone presenting the idea that the self and the aggregates are mixed together, similar in the way that fire and firewood are mixed together, in a sense. So here the person who's holding this view would say that the self and the aggregates have some kind of inexpressible relationship which cannot be specified as a sort of identity or a relationship of difference. That is, self and aggregates can neither be said to be exactly identical, nor can they be said to be in some way distinct, so that they're instead mixed in some ineffable fashion, an inexpressible fashion that it combined in the way that wood that's burning and fire are combined together. But that's not acceptable, because if something is a functional thing, it has to be necessarily either identical or it has to be other. That is, things have to be either one thing, or we have to be able to identify them in relationship to other things in a way in which they are other than other things. They're either identical or other than other things. One of those two options has to obtain.
대지단이 치다르여 세대 다 치다랑신지 여대 매와 가르래 sana yani yana 나방아디 요고래 나방아디 매위체 나방아디 지다 타다 니체 댄바체 티니다신 간도야 저도 매봐 전에 다디 인사르디 나방아디
So here then it says at the end in the last line of this verse, therefore, after going through these five alternatives, five kinds of analysis, how could the self exist is the question that Master Nagarjuna is posing. Since the self doesn't exist in relationship to the aggregates as being identical with the aggregates, it's not intrinsically separate from the aggregates. The aggregates in the self don't exist as in some sort of form of dependency. Either the self is intrinsically dependent upon the aggregates, or the aggregates are intrinsically dependent upon the self. And it doesn't, the self and the aggregates don't exist in some kind of inexpressible or ineffable relationship of being mixed together. None of those five alternatives is possible. Therefore, how is it that the self could exist by means of some kind of intrinsic nature? And this entails that it does not exist in that way, because when analyzed in these five ways, in these five forms, it doesn't exist.
Oh yeah, 지단 남자 남방아서나 아니 라신 유튜브 지단 남방아 매바서 라신 유튜브 지단 타대 이체 다 풍보라 라신 유튜브 땜바 많이 풍보달라 라신 유튜브 땜바 많이 바데 땜바 이체 아니 다 풍보다 라신 유튜브 라신기 유튜브 수기 땜바 많이 바 제가라 남자가 또 샤고래 대가라 아니 초바 풍비 초바 다이바 까바당 입 다이바 까두산바 아니 남준기를 바세가나 남준기 도스죠.
So here in this verse, Master Nagarjuna has presented five forms of analysis. That is saying that the self is identical with the aggregates, or the self is intrinsically distinct from the aggregates, that the self has some kind of dependent relationship with the aggregates, or the aggregates intrinsically depend upon the self, that the self exists in some inexpressible fashion. But there's also an analysis in which two additional ways of looking at this relationship between self and aggregates in terms of the configuration. The self is identical with the composite of the aggregates, that is rejected, or that the self is identical with the some kind of configuration of the aggregates is rejected. Those two additional forms of analysis added to the five given here is what is referred to as the sevenfold analysis.
Oh yeah.
La.
네, 양주라고.
Do you?
네, 양주라고. 신다랑 신다라 제대가라 신다랑기 양라당 지단 타대당 양바당 숨제 편준 대비 초년 신다랑기 양라라 양바당 양라 신다라 양바 초니체 초점제 대체 영아지체 초점제 초비 입체가라 뒤체 봐. 레전이 못들어서 되는선도와 신다랑게 양라다 지단 타다다 양바다 편준 대비 초니당 댄단바니 초점당 초비 입디 륜도 자가 만예장 아니 신다 줘봐 티신도 아니 가사양 어둠버데 만예장 아니 민게 따바던도 가사 줘고래 이래왜 봐 뭐요
So her question was answered. This is a reference to in the. It's also given in Essence of Good Explanations, the sevenfold analysis of the relationship between a cart and the components of the cart. That is, the cart is not identical with its components. It's not separate from its components. It doesn't intrinsically possess, the cart doesn't possess its components. It's not intrinsically dependent upon its components. It's not like the configuration, it's not the composite of the components. It's not some configuration of the components. So when one investigates the existence of the cart in that fashion, one finds that it doesn't exist in any of those seven alternatives, and that establishes then that the cart is simply designated upon the collection of the components of the parts and such of the cart, but it is not them.
Oh yeah, 다디 연재기 가사게 다음에 안에 예바 댐바데 자스다디 마체 쳐지 다음에 데
So that explains then the that presents the explanation of the selflessness of the person, and then next comes the discussion of selflessness of phenomena, and we'll leave that for later.
Oh yeah. 아니 사산이 쇼가면도 권다 쇼명아도 산이 권다 명간을 된거 주고 산이 쇼가체 권다 명아체 산이 양 차시나 권한죠. 권다 내가도 예나요.
So then tomorrow we'll meet in the morning for the first session, but in the evening I need to go for some medical examination, and afternoon. Yeah, in the afternoon I need to go for some medical examination. Therefore, thus we won't have the afternoon session tomorrow.
조심해도 장리 바디 산예진
Where it has not arisen and made arise, where it has arisen without decline, may it only grow stronger and stronger. The view of emptiness is supreme and most precious, where it has not arisen, made arise, where it has arisen without any decline, may it only grow stronger and stronger.